My daughter told me to find somewhere else to finish my days, just weeks after her father died. I didn't argue. I folded a few shirts, slipped our wedding photo into a bag, and left quietly. Grief had barely settled when concern turned into plans the house should be hers. I shouldn't live alone. It would be better for everyone. At a cheap motel, I tried to hear my own voice again. It was still there, small, but steady, waiting for me to listen. 3 days later, I sat with the lawyer. No drama, just papers and a careful look. He scanned the file, paused, and gave a soft, unbelieving laugh.
Did you even read the will?
He asked. Then he read it to me, the house in my name, the savings my husband set aside, and a simple condition that weighed more than money, my daughter's treatment of her mother with dignity. At that moment, something quiet inside me stood up. I thought enough, and that's where my story truly begins. 2 months isn't very long when you've shared a lifetime. People tell you time softens edges, but the first weeks are full of sharp corners, the chair he used, the silence after a joke that would have made him smile, the way the mail still arrives with his name. I keep catching myself setting out 2 cups, and then I stop, hand hovering, like I've interrupted a prayer. Being a widow sounds formal, like a title on stationery. What it feels like is smaller a woman who still reaches for a hand that isn't there. After the funeral, the world kept moving as if grief were a bus stop and I'd just missed my ride. Friends sent flowers and casseroles. And then the phone quieted. I learned which hours of the day are the loneliest, which memories arrive uninvited. I told myself I could manage, that love doesn't end because a heartbeat does. But love, without a person to land on, has a way of drifting. In that drift, I began to understand how easily a life can be nudged off its center. When your daughter uses her softest voice, you want to believe it's love talking. "Mom, you can't live alone," she said, placing a hand on my arm like I might bolt. I'd been living not alone for 43 years, and then I had to learn the shape of rooms without Rick in them. That's hard, yes, but it isn't the same as incapacity. I looked down at the family photo I'd been holding, Rick's eyes kind, mine a little tired, Vanessa's smile large enough to fill the frame. I pressed the edge of the frame into my palm until I felt its bite, something solid to remind me I was still here. "We'll help," she added, meaning decisions would be made for me, not with me, I wanted to say. "I'm grieving, not failing," I wanted to say. "I have routines and bills and a garden that still knows my hands." Instead, I nodded, because mothers pick their battles. I didn't know yet that this was the battle, and that silence can sound a lot like agreement. You learn a lot from how papers travel in a family. This one was glossy and decisive, full of smiling couples playing mahjong and walking along manufactured ponds. It slid across our table as if my future were a dish being served. Vanessa talked about amenities, Brandon about safety and community, and I chewed my food very carefully because dignity can be lost in a single careless bite. "They have activities," she said. "No more worrying about upkeep," as if the garden were a burden, not a history of seasons I'd lived through. I asked simple questions: who pays how far? When would this happen? And every answer sounded rehearsed. I could hear the machinery behind their words, gears turning on a plan made while I was still writing thank you notes for condolence cards. I kept my voice level because that's how you survive conversations designed to move you. I told myself brochures are only paper, but in families, paper becomes action very quickly. By dessert, they were speaking in timelines. I swallowed hard and wondered when my home had become an item on someone else's list. There's a manner some men adopt, all polish and patient pauses, as if numbers are a foreign language and he is the translator. Brandon unfolded spreadsheets on his tablet and used phrases like asset allocation and liquidity events. Watching me for comprehension, not respect, I've balanced a household through lean years and hospital bills. I know the price of flour and the cost of fear. When I asked about accounts Rick and I discussed, He redirected to what's best long-term, as if the question were an inconvenience. We're here to make it easier. Mom, he said, and the word we sat heavy in the room, an alliance declared. I smiled the smile women learn when they need time. I noted every deflection, every place he answered what wasn't asked. I asked to see the will, and he glanced at Vanessa before assuring me, "It's all in order." I thought of all the times Rick and I signed documents side by side. Marriage taught me to trust. Widowhood was about to teach me to verify. Brandon kept talking. I started listening between his words. Homes are built twice by contractors, and by the one who remembers where winter light lands. At Oakwood, I knew the January door's soft complaint, the step that creaked, the shelf that held the heavy bowl. The dining room learned teenage sighs and forgiveness. The hallway learned Rick's slower walks when his chest tightened. I kept the place upright through layoffs, broken appliances, and arguments that ended in quieter mornings. A house isn't walls, it's daily promises to care, to notice, to show up. I thought if I kept showing up, it would keep recognizing me. I watered plants, paid taxes, touched the banister like a rosary, only to learn you can tend a place faithfully and still be treated like a guest in it. Possession is a simple word that becomes complicated when grief and money sit at the same table. Vanessa lifted her chin and said "our" like a verdict. I felt an old reflex rise, the urge to soften, to rephrase, to keep peace at any cost. But peace isn't the same as surrender. "It's my house," I said, and I surprised myself with how even it sounded. She blinked. Brandon's jaw tightened. They spoke of logistics, moving dates, painters, what color the nursery would be if they expanded the family. I watched my future rewritten in a tense I hadn't agreed to. Part of me wanted to list every way I had paid for that roof overtime shifts. Missed vacations, the delicate math of medical copays, but mothers know that tallying sacrifice rarely earns interest. Instead, I repeated, "It's my house." The room cooled. She smiled the bright, brittle smile of a daughter who believes she is only taking what's already hers. In that moment, I understood love can be present, and entitlement louder. I decided to stop decorating my no with apologies. People don't always mean to be cruel. They choose the laziest truth. "You were just the wife," she said, erasing 43 years of scaffolding carpools. Midnight forms, pill counts, listening, forgiving, rebuilding. I went upstairs and folded towels, sweaters, the blouse Rick loved. I packed quietly. Grief is loud enough. I left the rooms like a church, lights off. Door eased shut. On the bedside table, I set his watch. Face up. Mothers carry more than they show. That night, my arms were full and mouth empty. Then came the stinging generosity, crisp bills like a tip. A ride to a motel with a flickering sign, assurances this was temporary. I checked in under my own name, set suitcases by the door, counted costs, made a list. The first loss is standing. I called the house. It rang and rang. Exiled from what I built. I learned a life can shrink to a bag and that I'd packed the wrong thing to fear. Marriage gives you access to a person's habits, the private systems no one else sees. Rick kept files like maps, tabs aligned, notes in the margins for my future self. "Eve, this is the policy we talked about. Ask Martin to review this clause." He believed in order, and in including me when decisions mattered. I remembered the day he showed me the will, how he said we could change it later, how he wanted it to reflect who we were, not just what we owned. Grief can make you doubt your memory, but muscle remembers the weight of a folder, the rhythm of his pen on paper. Vanessa's version, a transfer of everything to her, didn't match the man who brought me flowers for no reason, and double-checked beneficiary lines because life is messy. Documents shouldn't be. In the motel, I sat on the bed and said it out loud. "That is not Rick's will." The sentence steadied me. When you name a lie, you make room for the truth to walk in. Resolve doesn't arrive with trumpets. It comes like posture. You remember to sit up. I took the bus downtown because small acts of independence are repairs. Martin guided closings and refinances, paperwork that keeps a life on its rails. I trusted his devotion to fine print. He listened, eyes narrowing at I wasn't invited, jaw tightening at forged documents. I didn't cry. Relief came in handing knots to someone trained to untie them. As he reached for Rick's file, I set my hands on my knees to still the tremor, not fear. Release. Surprise is hard to hide in a professional man. Process hates being disrupted by removing a wife. He'd called the house, told I was traveling too distraught. Compassion stung. My grief was used. He photocopied the attendance sheet, my name waiting in an empty chair. The room stilled. If there's fraud, we address it. Before feelings, facts, he opened the file. And something unclenched, not triumph, not yet permission to trust instincts. Once I understood a story had been told about me, I started pulling threads. Who made the calls? Who sat in my empty chair and invented a palatable version of me? Fragile, forgetful, obstructive. I could see Vanessa smoothing her skirt. Brandon nodding, a notary watching signatures flow like a river redirected. Narratives harden fast when no one objects. I thought of all the times I'd smoothed family scenes, teaching everyone I'd accept the script handed to me. Not this time. I asked Martin to log everything: names, dates, copies. Paper is cold, but if you hold it long enough, it tells the truth. My grief rearranged itself around a new purpose, Rick used to say. Clarity is kindness. I chose to be very kind. Very clear, very hard to move. There's power in a sentence that leaves no room for doubt. Martin slid the thick folder across the desk and opened to the most recent will, the one Rick had updated 6 months before he died. He ran his finger along the lines as he read, and I felt myself breathe in time with his cadence. The language was plain, the intent unmistakable. The house in my name. 70% of assets to me. A trust for Vanessa, 10 million contingent on her treatment of her mother with dignity after his death. It was there in ink, not metaphor, not memory. Martin looked up. For a moment, neither of us spoke. In that quiet, I heard my own voice again, not loud, but steady enough to build on. Next steps, I asked. He outlined them: freezing accounts, contacting authorities, establishing possession. It sounded clinical. It felt like rescue. I placed my palm on the page where Rick had signed. And I thought you saw us, even at the end. Then I sat back, squared my shoulders, and said, let's begin. Martin read it twice, first as an attorney, then as a man letting me feel the safety inside the lines. Primary residence to Evelyn Carter, 70% of assets to spouse, 10 million in trust to daughter, distributions at 45, contingent on treating her mother with dignity after my death. By the second reading, I could recite it. What steadied me wasn't the money, it was the clarity. Rick had used plain words to protect the most complicated thing, a mother-daughter bond that could be turned into a lever. Contingent is a small hinge with a heavy door. I pictured him writing it sad, certain, and heard him, when people show you who they are. The paperwork shouldn't help them lie. Martin slid me a certified copy. Keep this on you. I tucked it into my bag like a passport back to my life. I'm not fragile about words anymore. After just a wife, I prefer precision over politeness. Martin's tone was even. Like whether elder abuse includes financial exploitation, undue influence, isolation from information. Fraud is false documents for gain. We likely have both. The room cooled not from fear, but because truth draws a clean boundary. Next steps: report to police. Notify probate court. Secure the residence. Freeze accounts while control is verified. I don't want revenge. I said, I want the truth to stand. Justice isn't revenge, he said. It's restoration. I thought of how often women my age are told to be grateful for crumbs, and how many loaves I'd baked for people who now wanted my seat at the table. Detective Rodriguez didn't perform outrage. She cataloged facts. I'll need your statement, dates, copies of the forged will, and any messages from your daughter. Her voice held that mix of compassion and competence you pray for when the ground shifts. At Martin's desk, I spoke into a recorder, slow and steady, the timeline from the funeral to the motel, the brochures, the reading I was excluded from, the $200 pressed into my hand like mercy. She asked careful questions: who attended, who called whom, which bank accounts changed, building a ladder of specifics we could climb later. "This isn't just family drama," she said. "This is criminal conduct." Martin lifted a corner of his mouth. "We're calling it Operation Justice," he told her. She didn't smile, exactly, but her eyes warmed. "Then let's operate." She coordinated with the Financial Crimes Unit while Martin drafted letters. I signed forms I never imagined I'd need. Power of attorney rescinded, notice to institutions, permission to access safe deposit records. I felt my backbone lengthen with each signature. There is a particular relief when professionals believe you without spectacle. I used to think money was numbers in tidy columns. That day, I watched it become levers and switches. Martin's paralegal sat at the edge of the conference table with a headset, reading from scripts I suspect she'd memorized. "This is counsel for the estate. We are instituting an immediate hold pending a fraud investigation." "Yes, I'll hold." The detective coordinated case numbers so that institutions understood this wasn't a squabble. It was an official action. By mid-afternoon, the primary investment accounts were locked. An hour later, utilities noted the dispute on the residence. It's a strange sensation, knowing that the card your daughter used 10 minutes ago will not work at dinner. I didn't savor it. I breathed because it meant the bleeding had stopped. Martin slid a list across to me, what was secured, what remained. "We'll get the rest," he said. "This buys time." I pictured Vanessa at a checkout counter. A beep that said no. The moment she realized control was not a birthright. I whispered, not a prayer, but a truth. Consequences are also a kind of teaching. Her voice had the old rhythm, the soften, the soothe, the shift. "Mom, I think Martin is overreacting. Daddy wanted things simple." I let the silence carry the weight of what she'd done. "You told his attorney I was traveling," I said. "You had a reading without me. You moved into my house." She exhaled through her nose, the sound she makes when she wants to reset the tone. "It's a misunderstanding. We were trying to help." I looked at Rick's signature on the real will and felt the steadiness he left me. "You forged documents, Vanessa." The pause on the line was a living thing. "I don't know what you think you have," she said. Smaller, I heard my own voice. Calm as a level. "I have your father's will. I have a detective sitting across from me. I have the truth." She reached for a story where she was the caretaker and I the problem to be solved. I reached for facts. "We can talk," I offered, "but not about pretending this didn't happen." Mothers know the difference between a child in distress and a woman caught by her own choices. He used the tone men reserve for negotiations they expect to win. "No need for the police. Evelyn, lawyers complicate things. We can be adults." Adults, in his vocabulary, meant undisputed authority on his side and gratitude on mine. I pictured the tablet with his graphs, the way he flattened questions into bullet points. "This is a family matter," he said. "The public won't be kind." I thought of kindness like a tool I'd used until my hands bled. "Privacy protected you when you broke the rules." I said, "It won't protect the rules you broke." He tried another door. "Think of Vanessa. Think of the grandchildren." "I am thinking of them," I wanted to say, which is why I won't model silence as a solution. 43 years. "Brandon," I said aloud. I kept the peace so everyone else could be comfortable. That season is over. He reminded me of reputation. I reminded him of records in the background. I could hear him typing, perhaps messaging Vanessa. "You'll regret this," he said finally. "I regret only what I allowed," I answered, and ended the call before my patience made promises my integrity couldn't keep. A case is a house to foundation. Frame, roof. Martin started with foundation my sworn affidavit, complete with dates and copies. He dictated while I spoke. Precise language that could stand up under cross-examination. The paralegal scanned and sealed exhibits, screenshots of texts, the forged will, envelopes postmarked with lies, chain of custody matters. Martin said, "We'll be meticulous." He drafted letters to each financial institution with the case number and the court's attention now engaged. He looped in a forensic accountant to map flows of funds and a private investigator, Carol Chen, to trace the provenance of the fake documents. "Forged wills don't appear out of thin air," he said. "They're made." Carol arrived with a camera that clicked like certainty and eyes that saw what panic hides. "Start with printers, witnesses, notaries," she murmured, already assembling a web. I watched professionals do what I had done. For decades, in smaller ways, take chaos, sort it, label it, make it honest. Each folder Martin closed felt like a floorboard secured. For the first time in days, my hands were steady enough to hold a pen without leaving a tremor in my name. Leaving the motel, I felt that lightness that comes when you stop auditioning for your own life. I bought a bitter coffee and drank it plain heat and purpose. I paused the garden service, confirmed my refills, small logistics, each one saying I'm still here, on a bench. I moved the certified will to the front of my wallet and slid our wedding photo behind it, not nostalgia. A witness. A woman asked for directions. I answered, surprised by how normal my voice sounded. Dignity returns fast when you tell the truth in the right room. I tossed the cup and walked back to the work. Not triumph, traction. Detective Rodriguez had said there'd be a warrant if the evidence aligned. It did. That evening, while Martin filed in probate, she texted one word: executing. I didn't ask where. Later, I heard the pieces Vanessa's declined card, the polite manager, the officers, the sober click of handcuffs. I sat at my kitchen table, my kitchen, and folded laundry. I wasn't gloating, I was breathing in my own home. I put away sale dish towels because practicality is a habit I won't apologize for. Somewhere across town, a daughter learned accountability isn't a mother's patience. I whispered Rick's line after hard choices. We did the necessary thing. Sometimes necessary is the kindest word you get. White-collar men rarely expect interruption. Brandon had calendars, assistants, a lobby with a bowl of mints that tried too hard. The forensic trail Martin and Detective Rodriguez mapped pointed to a printer used for internal presentations and a notary who didn't recall a signature she stamped. The arrest warrant did more than recall it. They took his devices, asked him to stand, and read him rights he imagined were for other people. When Martin told me, I sat very still. There is a temptation to narrate a downfall as morality play. But the truth is simpler actions meet consequences. My phone buzzed with messages from numbers I didn't recognize, colleagues of his. Perhaps, or acquaintances sniffing for gossip. I let them pass unanswered. I opened the file drawer and placed the latest court document atop the stack. Paper, unlike rumor, doesn't need an audience. I made oatmeal and ate it slowly. The house was quiet in a way that finally felt like peace, not exile. Somewhere downtown, a man who had smiled through my questions was answering some he couldn't redirect. The room felt different the moment I crossed the threshold, lighter, as if the house had unclenched. Vanessa had moved in quickly, leaving the impatience of new ownership in her wake, tags on hangers. Perfume too strong for morning, a half-assembled vanity. I gathered her things without ceremony, not angrily, methodically. There is a special relief in ordering what someone else scattered, in restoring a room to its true purpose. I set her bags on the porch, texted a simple message through Martin so it was documented. Your belongings are available for pickup at 4 p.m. No adjectives, no apologies. I changed the sheets and opened the window. The air carried a memory of Rick's aftershave and my lavender detergent. a blend that made the room ours again. I took a framed photo from the dresser Rick and me in the early years, sunburned and certain, and placed it back on the wall. Not as a shrine, but as a witness to continuity. I didn't barricade the door. I didn't have to. Ownership, once re-established, is a quiet force. Janet's voice was clear, practiced, and human. Mrs. Carter, I cover elder financial abuse. Your case. It could help people recognize patterns. I've always been wary of turning pain into content, but I also know the isolation of not having words for what's happening to you. I'm not interested in revenge, I told her, nor are we, she said. We're interested in warning signs, exclusion from decisions, sudden transfers, forged authority, a narrative of incompetence. She was speaking about my week back to me. I asked for time, and she agreed. After we hung up, I stood at the kitchen counter and wrote 3 columns on a yellow pad. What happened? What helped? What I wish I'd known sooner. The second column grew fastest, a good lawyer, a steady detective, a pie with clear eyes, copies of everything, a friend to remind you to eat. The third column surprised me. Tell someone early. Don't excuse patterns because you love the person making them. Keep proof where love can't edit it. I didn't know yet if I'd go on television, but I knew this silence is a luxury too expensive for most women my age. I pressed my palm flat on the page and said, "We'll see." Ownership is quiet. It doesn't shout or slam doors. It breathes. That night, I noticed small things only a caretaker would feel, the way the mattress holds when you're the person meant to sleep there. The way the light on the dresser returns to a warmer color when it isn't performing for anyone else. I put my book on Rick's old nightstand and did not apologize for taking space. I said goodnight out loud, not to invite ghosts, but to mark a threshold before and after. Grief still lived there, yes, but it had moved into a smaller room. In the big room, there was room for me. I didn't make promises. I didn't vow reinvention. I simply lay on my back and felt the roof I paid for, the air I heated, the linens I washed. Power can be that simple, a body in the right bed. When I woke near dawn, the first thought wasn't loss. It was a list: phone calls, forms, the day's work. I pressed my palm to the wall and thanked the house for waiting. There's a tone even careful attorneys get when surprise becomes pattern. Vanessa's bail is $50, Martin said. Brandon's is $200. The judge didn't love what he saw. He paused. Evelyn, there are prior inquiries, securities matters, nothing proven yet. But smoke. I kept my voice steady. Then someone should look for fire. We reviewed the status accounts frozen. Property secured, preliminary charges filed. Martin's paralegal read me the next dates like a calendar of weather fronts. You'll be asked for a victim impact statement at arraignment, Martin added. I wrote the phrase down and circled victim twice. The word didn't sit easily, but it belonged in the record. He warned me that Brandon's counsel might posture, that Vanessa's attorney might seek sympathy. We stick to facts, he said. Facts are kinder than spin in the long run. After the call, I stood at the sink, hands in warm water, and let the temperature return me to the present. It is disorienting to learn that the man who explained my finances to me is the one who should have been explaining himself to regulators. Disorientation fades. Documentation remains. Grief rearranges a house. So does reclamation. In the study, I opened drawers that had held ledgers and placed sketchbooks in there instead. Rick once teased that I organized life like a museum registrar. Today, I curated my future. The desk would face the window, the easel would get morning light, the wall would hold a rail for brushes, and an unframed corkboard for ideas that weren't ready to be respectable. Downstairs, the wine cellar had always felt like someone else's brag. I called a carpenter and asked about shelves for books that had been double-stacked for years. Floor to ceiling, nothing fancy, strong enough for real weight. I said. He gave me a number. I said yes without asking permission. People assume late-life changes are cosmetic. Mine were structural rooms repurposed to reflect the woman who'd kept them running without ever putting her name on the door. I saved Rick's fountain pen in a jar on the studio table. You can honor a past and still redraw the blueprint. That afternoon, I sat on the floor with painter's tape and blueprinted the library in lines of possibility. Journalists live on urgency, widows live on pacing. Janet's argument was sound exposure prevents harm, teaches patterns, chips at shame, but a story told too soon can carry the metallic taste of adrenaline instead of the warmth of meaning. I hear you, I told her. I'm not ready to be public. Not yet. She accepted it with professionalism rare enough to note. When you are ready, the frame matters, she said. We can center resources, not spectacle, after we hung up. I rehearsed what I would say if I ever did speak, that love can coexist with manipulation, that competence doesn't vanish at 67, that isolation is the first tool abusers use and the last wound to heal. I wrote a sentence on a card and taped it inside a cabinet. Tell the truth when it helps, guard the rest until it's strong. Then I went outside and watered the rosemary. Advocacy would come. Today's work was steadier appointments, lists, a home reclaimed inch by inch. The world could wait one more day for my voice. I'd waited decades to hear it myself. There's a choreography to apologies that arrive under pressure. She had the voice, the softened consonants, the tremble at the edge, the appeal to history. Mom, I was wrong, she said, eyes shining, hands empty. The house was behind me like a witness. I stepped outside rather than invite the confusion of old rituals in. You told me to leave my home, I said, not as accusation, but as fact. She reached for narratives, stress after the funeral, Brandon's advice, the complexity of estates. I let each explanation land and rest on the porch boards where they belonged. There are consequences, I said. She nodded quickly. The way you do when you want the moment to speed up and end in relief. I'll fix it, she promised, as if this were a broken vase and not a sequence of deliberate acts. I kept my tone level. Fixing starts with admitting what you did, not what you wish you had done. She looked past me, into the house that reflected a story she hadn't written. I did not move. Doorways are for thresholds, not retreats. We made that recording 6 months before he died. At Martin's urging, Rick spoke the way he did when it mattered calm, specific, unblinking. If you're hearing this, our fears were warranted. Your mother isn't an obstacle. She's the reason you had a home. He explained the trust clause not as a threat, but as a lesson in boundaries. As his voice filled the space, I watched Vanessa's posture drain not theater, but the collapse that comes when excuses run out. When it ended, the quiet felt almost kind. He hated me, she whispered. No, I said. He loved you enough to put rails on a road he knew you might leave. Tears can be honest without absolving. I handed her a tissue, kept my voice steady, and let love do what it must tell the truth. Then wait for the adult in the room to answer. Some words require standing to say them. I did. There are consequences, I told her, and I let the sentence be the size it needed to be no smaller to make us both comfortable. She asked for alternatives, mediation, family meetings, a reset. I have reset more times than our appliances. Court, I said, with counsel, with records. She tried to use the grandchildren as a shield. I refused to let love be conscripted into the wrong army. They deserve parents who tell the truth. I said, I kept my voice low so the neighbors wouldn't inherit this moment. I won't argue with you on the porch, I added. You have my lawyer's number. A long time ago, I would have offered tea to soften a hard conversation. That's how women are trained to carry the weight of other people's choices. This time. I opened the storm door and stepped back inside. The latch clicked. The house accepted my decision like a key turning. Manipulation prefers the shorthand of text fast, unnuanced, designed to provoke. Think of the kids, she wrote. As if motherhood were a button, She could press and reset my boundaries. I stared at the message until the impulse to explain myself passed. Explanations are treats you give to people who have earned them. I typed slowly. They deserve the truth. Then I put my phone face down and made soup. I am not a woman of grand gestures. I am a woman who simmers stock and waits for flavor to deepen. An hour later, another text arrived from an unfamiliar number, Brandon's mother, perhaps hinting at family image and public consequences. I wrote nothing back. When you remove an audience, some performances end. Before bed, I wrote in my notebook, 2 kinds of love, one that protects appearances and one that protects people. I underlined the second. The phone glowed once more, then went dark. Silence can be a fortress when you choose it. She arrived composed and uninvited. We all want what's best, Eleanor said, offering $2 million for my inconvenience, then 5 when I didn't bite. You'll avoid a painful spectacle. I remembered the motel and the $200, the spectacle of being escorted out of my life. Hands folded, I said. Justice isn't for sale. Her smile thinned. She pivoted to warnings, careers, children, the family name. You're talking optics, I answered. I'm talking law. Finally, her trump card hints about irregularities in Rick's business. The floor tilted. I didn't. If there are truths, I'll face them. I won't be bullied into silence. She adjusted her poise, left her card like a dare, and went. After she left, I sat in the chair she had warmed and let the implication cool. I have loved a man enough to know his habits and blind spots. Rick was not perfect. He was particular. Could particular be a cover? The question felt disloyal and necessary. I called Martin and relayed every word. He didn't dramatize. He documented. We'll explore, he said. If there's mud, they'll throw it. We need facts first. I wrote a sentence for myself on a sticky note. Courage is not certainty. It's proceeding without it. Then I walked through the house, touching the things Rick had touched, books spined with notes. A drawer with warranties, a framed receipt from our first mortgage we'd kept for luck. Love makes you want to protect memory from scrutiny, but I am too old to worship stories that can't stand light. I brewed tea and stood at the window until my pulse slowed. If Eleanor intended to rattle me, she succeeded for an hour. After that, she handed me my next necessary task. Carol's yes was clean. Tell me what access you have, she said, and I listed files, passwords, the cabinet in the study with the second lock. She arrived with her compact camera, a portable scanner, and the steady air of someone who respects paper. We'll image everything and keep originals untouched, she said. Gloving up, I signed an engagement letter that protected my privacy and her independence. Then we worked. She photographed ledgers, cross-referenced vendors, noted patterns of payments that sang off key. She asked questions I hadn't thought to ask. Why was this consulting fee paid quarterly to a company with no staff? Why do these invoices skip months and reappear at round numbers? Why does this memo reference a meeting in a city Rick never visited? Each why tightened a thread. When she left that evening, she promised a preliminary read within days. If there's nothing, we'll know, she said. If there's something, we'll know faster. After she'd gone, I washed my hands like I do after gardening, slowly, thoroughly, until the water ran clear. Knowing is a kind of cleanliness. Her update came with the restrained gravity of a surgeon. Evelyn. Patterns indicate layered transfers, funds routed through shell entities, fees for services unsupported by deliverables, counterparties that resolve to mail drops. She didn't use word laundering lightly. It's consistent with the money movement designed to obscure origin. She said, my first reaction was refusal, no, not Rick, and then the steadier truth. You wanted the truth, and it might be hard. Carol laid out a chart, dates, amounts, entities with names that felt like placeholder words. A person thought no one would read closely. She also marked legitimate contracts, real clients. real outcomes. The picture was mixed enough to hurt. This doesn't prove criminal intent, she cautioned. But if regulators look, they'll find questions. I sat with that. Love asks for loyalty. Integrity asks for light. Keep going, I told her. She nodded. After the call, I opened the studio window and let in air that had not been inside any argument. I placed Rick's pen back in its jar and whispered, "Let it be true whatever the truth is." Then I picked up my brush and made a single, careful line. Bad news doesn't always arrive as thunder. Sometimes it's a sentence said evenly by a woman who respects facts. If federal agents review these flows and decide they're proceeds of crime, they can seize them pending investigation. Carol explained, I heard the legal words civil forfeiture, evidentiary thresholds, cooperation agreements, and translated them into my life. The house I'd just reclaimed, the accounts Rick built, the library I'd begun planning with floor-to-ceiling shelves. I thought of boxes labeled carefully, of paint swatches for the studio, of the coffee I'd drink tomorrow in the kitchen. I fought to keep. A different fear tried to bloom, one that says, see, it was safer to stay small. I let it surface and pass. What's the best path, I asked. Voluntary disclosure, Carol said. Control the narrative, bring counsel, and tell the truth before someone weaponizes it. Control the narrative. For months, I had been written by other people's sentences. I picked up the phone, not to defend Rick's memory, but to defend my integrity. Even if the ground moved, I would choose the direction. It came dressed as generosity, the thief offering cab fare after taking your car. Mom, this is practical, Vanessa said. Keep the house. $5 million in clean assets. Immunity if we cooperate about Dad. I asked who certifies clean, which agency blesses immunity. Whether my fear had already been paraded to the feds, she pressed urgency. We need an answer tonight. A younger me might have rushed to keep the damage small. I set the phone on speaker and let the silence teach. I won't barter with the truth, I said. If there's a process, it won't be yours. She hung up. Deals sound different when dignity is in the room. The house contained evidence of taste and money. Rugs chosen carefully, appliances that hummed with quiet confidence, frames that made family look permanent. I touched none of it. I sat at the kitchen table, the place where budgets and birthdays had shared space, and weighed what could not be insured. Self-respect is an account you spend from daily. When it runs low, you buy peace with pieces of yourself. I'd done that for decades, smoothed conversations, absorbed slights, rephrased my own needs until they sounded like favors. The $5 million glittered like a shortcut through fear. But shortcuts often lead you back to the problem wearing new shoes. I need to think. I told Vanessa words that were not a stall, but a boundary. Then I called Martin. We go to the bureau, I said. He paused only to confirm I understood the risks. I do, I answered. I also understand what it costs to sell my voice. I hung up and wrote one line on a card for my pocket. If it's yours by right, don't buy it back. Agent Martinez returned the call herself, a courtesy and a signal. Start at the beginning, she said, and I did, placing dates like stepping stones, the funeral, the brochures, the forged will, the motel, the frozen accounts, the arrests, Eleanor's polished menace, Carol's findings, and the deal that required my cooperation and my silence. I didn't varnish Rick. I also didn't condemn him without proof. Here's what I know, and here's what I do not, I said. She asked the kind of questions that make a story hold. Who told you to stay away from the reading? Who printed the forged documents? Which accounts received suspect transfers? What exact words were used in the extortion attempt? You understand you may have benefited from funds later deemed tainted. She noted. I do, I said. I came to you because sunlight is safer than shadows. She exhaled a small, approving sound. We prefer witnesses who choose the light. Are you willing to assist? Further willing is a polite word for ready. Yes, I said, whatever is needed within the truth. Agreement settled over me like a steady coat. This wasn't drama. It was logistics and courage in equal parts. Agent Martinez outlined the parameters consensual recording under state law. A controlled meet at my home to reduce variables. A team staged nearby. A signal phrase if I felt unsafe. She explained what the tape could and could not capture in court. How prosecutors think about intent. How extortion sounds when you slow it down and let jurors hear the pivot from persuasion to pressure. You will feel observed, she warned. But you will also be protected. Protected. It is a word older women learn to mistrust. Protection often arrives with a bill. I asked about safety after, about sealing my address from public filings, about support if threats followed. Her answers were specific. Specifics are a kind of mercy. We'll wire you, test levels, and you'll invite them to finalize terms, she said. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. One more thing, I added. I won't bait them. We don't need bait, she said. We need truth on tape. Fear had been useful, an alarm that got me out of the motel, into Martin's office, onto firmer ground. But alarms are not meant to ring forever. In my bedroom, a female agent adjusted the wire and had me speak a few sentences to test the levels. I listened to my own voice through a speaker lower than I remembered, calmer than I felt when this began. One more deep breath, she said, taping the transmitter and arranging the blouse so nothing showed. I practiced the simple lines we'd planned, neutral invitations that would let Brandon and Vanessa reveal themselves. Downstairs, the team checked timestamps and entry points. I looked at the studio door, at the rolls of painter's tape I had used to sketch a better future, and whispered to myself, hold your line. The doorbell would ring soon. I poured water. I sat in my chair. People imagine courage as a shout. Mine was a steady posture and the refusal to move when the old patterns tried to reclaim me. They arrived dressed for a meeting. Not an apology. Brandon carried a briefcase and an air of inevitability. We've structured this favorably, he began, as if he were presenting quarterly results. 5 million traced to clean sources. You retain the residents. We all sign mutual releases. The rest, well, best to let sleeping dogs lie. Vanessa reached for my hand and missed when I did not extend it. Mom, we can heal if we stop looking backward, she said, her voice tuned to a minor key. I asked questions any adult would. Who certified the funds as clean? Which agency promised immunity? Where? Exactly. Would my signature appear in that promise? Brandon smiled the way men do when they expect compliance. Leave the mechanics to us. Mechanics are where harm hides. I let their words gather on the coffee table like dust you plan to wipe away. We're thinking of the family, Vanessa whispered. So am I said. And it didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a sentence with a spine. Predators prefer to control the frame. Questions redraw it. I watched Brandon's eyelids flicker a tell and Vanessa's mouth open before she had a story ready. What do you mean he stalled? Did you know before the funeral, before the forged will, or only when you started planning to take what wasn't yours? The quiet that followed had weight, if they said before. They were complicit in silence. If after, they were opportunists who weaponized a discovery. This isn't relevant, Brandon tried. It's central, I answered, and leaned back. Because if you knew, you let me walk blind. And if you didn't, you built a scheme on shadows. Vanessa blinked hard, searching for a softer path that wasn't there. We were trying to protect you, she said finally. The oldest refrain. By forging, lying, and extorting, I asked. Not unkindly. I didn't raise my voice. I lowered the room's excuses instead. Somewhere outside. A car door thumped faintly, a sound I had learned to hear differently. We had agreed on a phrase that fit my mouth, and the moment I prefer everything in writing. When I said it, the living room shifted from stage to evidence locker. Agent Martinez and 2 others stepped through the door with the efficient calm of people who have practiced this move 100 times. Brandon Hayes, Vanessa Hayes federal warrants. She announced, badges out, papers offered, voices level. Brandon's confidence cracked into outrage. Vanessa's went to pleading in a single breath. The agents moved with choreography that didn't require my participation. I sat still, hands in my lap, the way I have in so many rooms while other people decided things. The difference was that this time, I had decided first. "You can't do this," Brandon sputtered. "We were negotiating. You were extorting a cooperating witness," Agent Martinez corrected. The cuffs clicked, practical as seatbelts. My heart didn't race. It kept the same even tempo it had found when I agreed to wear the wire. I had told the truth. The truth had companions now. Cornered men reach for bigger shadows. "You don't know who you're provoking," Brandon hissed, eyes cutting toward me as if menace were a tool that might still work. "I've lived long enough to recognize borrowed power. Are you threatening a federal witness, Mr. Hayes?" Agent Martinez asked, the formality of her voice the only sharp thing in the room. "I'm warning her," he said, and in that distinction, he confessed more than he intended. "Add witness intimidation," she told a colleague, who noted it without flinching. Vanessa cried then a sound that might once have broken me. Today it landed like rain on a roof I built. "Mom, please," she said, as if I held a lever that could rewind an hour, a month, a lifetime. "I hope you become the woman you pretend I am," I replied softly, and meant it. As they were led out, Brandon tried to regain dignity with silence. It didn't return. Dignity isn't a coat you put on over handcuffs. It's earned earlier, in rooms where no one is watching. When the house finally quieted, Agent Martinez asked to speak privately. She set a thick folder down, "Mrs. Carter. Your husband cooperated with us for 12 years undercover financial intelligence, monitored, documented, paid under legal agreements." She turned to a page I knew by his signature. A federal countersignature stood beside it. What looked like laundering was controlled. His work helped secure 47 arrests. "The funds are lawful and recoverable to you. Why didn't anyone tell me?" I asked. "Compartmentalization," she said. "Ongoing operations, and we needed to verify your role. Today did that." Grief and pride braided in my chest. For once, my lifelong habit of taking care felt matched by something new being cared for. There is a breath your body saves for the moment. After the danger you couldn't name steps into the light and becomes manageable. I took that breath. The house sounded like itself, again a clock, a refrigerator, the ordinary orchestra of a life resumed. I thought about how close I had come to selling my voice for a tidy settlement. How tempting it is to choose smaller safety over larger truth. "What happens next?" I asked. "Due process." Agent Martinez said, "Prosecution, restitution, and whatever future you decide to build." The word future didn't ache anymore. It felt like a room with many doors, and no one standing in the frame telling me where I couldn't go. I walked to the studio, set Rick's pen beside my brush, and stood at the blank canvas I'd been avoiding. You don't need to know the whole painting to lay the first strokes. I made a mark, then another, steady and deliberate, not victory as a shout. Victory as a woman in her own house, her name on the deed, her voice on the record, her dignity intact. 6 months is long enough for a house to learn your name again. The kitchen no longer sticks, windows rise easily, and morning air moves through like permission. My days are simpler now. Coffee, a quiet walk through rooms I chose, a glance at the calendar, one last call to the contractor. I still talk to Rick, not from stuckness, but because love doesn't vanish when the paperwork ends. It asks, "What matters today?" Dignity does my own grocery list, no explanations for a bowl or a chair, the teapot catching light like a small award. I open the window wider. We breathe unapologetically. Sophia comes with charts I can actually read. She talks to me like a partner, not a beneficiary of her brilliance, You're conservative by temperament, she says. And that's an asset. We've balanced your income needs with growth. And you have room for generosity that won't jeopardize your security. We check accounts, beneficiaries, tax implications. Then we move to what lights us both up the fund. The Eve Carter Elder Protection Fund is small by some measures and enormous by others. We underwrite legal consults for seniors who can't afford to ask a lawyer. Is this normal? We subsidize forensic reviews of suspicious transfers. We print a one-page guide on warning signs, exclusion, urgency, secrecy, and we distribute it through churches, clinics, libraries. Sophia's sister Carol consults on the fraud modules. Detective Rodriguez reviews our language for accuracy. You're proving something, Sophia says as we sign the last compliance document. That prudence and courage are not opposites. I think of the motel, the $200, the thin towels, and then of this table with papers that protect other women's futures. We are, I say, quietly and on purpose. We named them for the people who taught me resilience without speeches, Mrs. Alvarez from next door, who watched my daughter after school when Rick worked late, the church treasurer who caught an error that would have cost us, the nurse who taught me how to read medication labels without panic. The scholarships go to women returning to school after caregiving, to paralegal programs, social work, nursing fields that build safety in other people's lives. At the small ceremony, I keep it human. No fancy podium, just a circle of chairs, a plate of cookies, a stack of folders with letters inside. This is not charity, I tell them. It's a vote of confidence. I sign each certificate and look each woman in the eye long enough to say, I see you, and I know what it took to get here. Hands don't shake when the signature matches your own life. After, one recipient pulls me aside and whispers, My son tried to get me to sign over the house last year. I didn't. Your story helped. I press her hand and think, this is what winning looks like, not headlines. But one mother keeping her keys. When the producer called, I expected a sparkle. What I heard was respect. We want to tell this without spectacle, she said. We'll focus on systems, how fraud happens, how women fight back, how institutions can support or fail them. I agreed on one condition: the money feeds the work. Contracts can be moral documents if you write them that way. Sophia read every line. Martin negotiated clauses that protect my privacy where it still matters. Agent Martinez reviewed anything that might affect ongoing cases. You won't be the tragic heroine. The producer promised. You'll be the narrator of your own survival. I liked that. We set the royalties to funnel straight into the fund and earmarked a portion for shelters and legal clinics. When the announcement went out, messages arrived from strangers who recognized themselves in my outline: women in their 30s managing parents' estates, women in their 60s managing daughters' appetites for more. I typed the same reply over and over. You're not overreacting. Get documents, invite witnesses, tell the truth somewhere safe. The show can do the loud teaching. I'll keep doing the quiet kind. The first letters were defensive, the middle ones frantic, the latest measured. She cycles through every key on the family piano apology, tuned to self-pity, then to blame, then to bargaining. I read 3, then stop for a while. Boundaries aren't punishments. They're training wheels for relationships that wobble. When I write back, I'm brief. I hope you use this time to tell yourself the whole truth. I say, I don't accept contact that shifts responsibility onto me. She asks about the children. I answer in nouns, not adjectives. They are safe. When she appeals to our history, I think of every casserole I made, every night I waited up, every yes that cost me a little voice. I don't need to catalog my goodness to justify my no. I send her a list of books and a number for a counselor I trust. I make clear that forgiveness, if it happens, will not be a shortcut around accountability. Consequences aren't only in court. I write, they live in what we can be to each other now. I sign with my full name. I am not shrinking to make anyone comfortable again. People flinch when I say it, as if I've broken a sacred vase. I haven't. I've stopped worshipping it. Blood ties are data. Family is a practice. I have relatives I love who will never understand what happened here because nothing like it has ever threatened their sense of place. I have neighbors who showed up with pliers and soup when the sink broke, and they have my spare key. I have a lawyer who answered late-night emails without making me feel small, a detective who believed evidence over performance, an agent who asked for courage and paid it back with protection. These are family by behavior. It doesn't mean I hate my daughter. It means I've moved mother from a role that devours me to a relationship that respects me. On Sundays, I set a bigger table for whoever needs a chair. We pass bread and stories. No one is allowed to tell anyone else who they are. We listen. We ask, what would make you safer this week? And then, where we can, we do that. That's family, too. Vengeance drains you even when you're right. Becoming gives back what the years took. The sign is simply a postcard pinned above the window. Black letters on white stock, no flourish. It's not for guests, it's for the mornings when old habits knock. I pour tea, kindly, for myself, not as a consolation prize, but as a daily ceremony that says, you did not disappear to keep others comfortable. The studio smells faintly of paper and paint, of work in progress, on the table. The fountain pen waits beside my sketchbook. I think about the girl I was at 25, the woman at 43, the widow at 67. Each version tried her best with what she knew. I don't need to disown them to outgrow them. I make a list of what more means now, more boundaries, more generosity where it's welcome, more saying no to the wrong work so I have yes for the right kind. I sip and watch the light shift across the floor. There is nothing dramatic to report. Only this: I am content, and I've earned it. Names matter. They return us to ourselves. On the spines, authors who taught me language. For things I once only felt, Parker on boundaries. Hooks on love, Didion on keeping notebooks. On the shelf facing the door, binders labeled with grant cycles, case summaries, outcomes. I read the names of applicants we've already approved. Some we couldn't. And the ones who are waiting, I say them out loud because intention becomes sturdier when spoken. Mrs. Green, emergency consultation funded. Mr. Lopez, travel voucher to visit the bank manager who actually knows him. Miss Paul Ona Pamil Patel, forensic review of suspicious withdrawals. I imagine the moment each person will feel less alone, less confused, more capable of saying, show me the document. We track metrics not because donors demand it, but because success deserves witnesses. I close a binder and rest my hand on its cover. There is a quiet holiness in paperwork well used. Upstairs, the kettle clicks off. I leave the lights on in the library a little longer, the way you do when you're expecting someone to come home safe. I put it off for weeks. It felt indulgent, maybe dangerous, to place myself at the center of the canvas. But one morning the line arrived, the way courage often does without fanfare. Exactly on time. I sketched the outline, not young, not softened beyond recognition, but honest. The mouth isn't apologizing. The eyes aren't asking permission. The shoulders carry what they should and nothing else. I layered color where grief still lives, not to hide it, but to make it part of the story the way a knot in wood proves the tree survived a storm. When I stepped back, I saw a woman made of thousands of small decisions to tell the truth, to call for help, to sign her name steady, to open the window and let air in. Victim is a chapter, survivor is a bridge, citizen is the life on the other side. I washed my brushes, wiped the table, and signed the canvas E. Kotrabadha, the signature matched the woman I've become. Outside, the day had moved on without asking me to keep pace. I joined it, unhurried, unafraid. Some people asked me to disappear quietly, neatly, like a page torn from the back of a book. I chose something braver to become myself in full view. If my story found you at a kitchen table like mine, with papers you don't understand and a voice that's grown small, hear me, your worth is not up for negotiation. Dignity is not a favor someone gives you. It's a right you practice, one clear sentence at a time. If this touched something tender in you, tell us in the comments. Your words might be the map another woman needs tonight. And if you've seen the early signs being left out of readings, urgent transfers, pressure to sign in silence, check the description. We've listed resources: the Elder Fraud Hotline, State Adult Protective Services, free legal clinics, and a one-page guide to red flags you can print and keep. I'm Eve. I was told to vanish. I didn't. I learned to say no without apology, yes without permission, and help without shame. You're not alone, and you are not late. When you're ready, choose yourself and let the rest adjust.